Let's Listen Verse, and today I'm going to be reviewing How to Dispatch a Human, Stories and Suggestions by Stephanie Andrea Allen. I was given an advanced reader's copy of this book by BLF Press. Thank you to Stephanie Andrea Allen and BLF Press for giving me the opportunity to review this short story collection. All opinions are my own. And I'm just going to read the summary from the back. The synopsis says, in this daring collection of speculative fiction, Stephanie Andrea Allen attends the lives of Black women, mostly lesbian or queer, all keenly aware of the forces seeking to consume them. A Black lesbian working the gig economy runs into a trio of motorized scooters and helps them escape from Earth. An enchanted sleep mask gives a woman the gift of slumber, but what will it cost her? A suburban housewife is framed for murder by her homophobic neighbor. And in the follow-up to Luna 6000, a young woman investigates her mother's untimely death and learns the truth about her family. Stephanie Andrea Allen's How to Dispatch a Human is an unapologetic, often humorous foray into the quotidian magic that envelopes Black women's lives. The 11 stories in this collection are filled with characters who will entice and delight readers as they traverse the worlds around them. With a mix of near fabulism, near future, and other speculative fictions, Allen reminds us in exquisitely nuanced prose that the fantastical can be found amongst the ordinary. So that kind of sums up what this collection is about. In general, the theme is that in each story, the main character either dies or faces some weird, often horrific transformation. It's about having fun with gore and the absurd and I think reckoning with mortality and sort of how it can be like this big, momentous thing sometimes, but also sometimes the ways that we die are just kind of ridiculous. Although I don't know if there's really anything some of these characters could have done or how they could have possibly seen what was coming because it is just so far out of left field. So in terms of content warnings, I would just give you a heads up that there is domestic abuse, pregnancy complications, and a lot of gore in these stories. By and large, I enjoyed it. I thought it was humorous. The humor in here is more grim. It's kind of about whatever more powerful creatures out here hunting humans getting the last laugh a lot of the time. I thought the gore was fun. I think the only stories where the gore wasn't necessarily fun was Luna 6000 and Tumbleweave and Love Thy Neighbor. It's not like an alien or something wreaking the havoc. It is something that feels like a more realistic threat. For me, the gore in here, it's like in detail, but it's kind of like pretty frank detail. It's not necessarily one of those stories where it's going to give like very dramatic descriptions of what the gore looks like. Allen kind of tells us the gore, it's kind of nasty, and then she moves on. And for me, it was like kind of in the sweet spot of enough gore to be fun, but not too much that like I'm going to be like haunted by it. Pretty much all the stories are set on our Earth, and it's either weird happenings to everyday people or it's sort of like a projected Earth. But even the projected Earths feel very familiar. Like the motorized scooters are based on a rental service app that people might be familiar with. There are discussions of smart homes and smart devices that are becoming increasingly pertinent. In terms of the writing style, the writing here is pretty straightforward. There's no issues with it. I'm someone who tends to like writing that's more like elaborate. It's just my preference. In terms of how the stories are structured, I would say that the characters aren't really the focus. The characters are kind of a device to like walk us through this paranormal, supernatural, extraterrestrial encounter. And I really enjoyed the situations by and large. Of the 11 stories in here, I think there's only 2 that didn't really work for me. And in terms of how the collection is structured, there's the story Luna 6000, which is about a pregnant woman and the AI that is helping her to deal with her pregnancy complications. And then the last story in the collection is Project M, which follows up on that story. Also at the end, which I thought was cute, there's this glossary. Basically, it lists the different ways that the characters in the story have died and has a little woody tie-in, little nudge, nudge, wink, wink to how it relates to the anthology as a whole. And so in terms of my overall favorite stories, there were 2 that I really, really liked. The first one is Coral D. Cat, or How to Dispatch a Human. This is a story about a pampered cat who tells her owner to kill her overreaching roommate. I could see why that is the titular story, and it very much so ties in to the image on the cover. You'll have to read to figure out how and why. For those who can't see, the cover shows a stack of mugs and a drop of blood spilling into the top mug. So this story kind of sets the formula that a lot of the stories follow, which is that there's a woman, typically a black woman, who is just kind of living her everyday life, and she encounters some entity far more powerful than her, far more knowledgeable than her, with a very decided disdain for human life. The main villain, the cat, is like very fun antagonist. Like he very much so looks down on humans. Kind of made me think of Brain from Pinky and the Brain, but if Brain were a lot more competent. Coral D. Cat, or How to Dispatch a Human, I think really encapsulates what this collection is about. It's silly, it's absurd, it's gory, it's fun. I think that cat owners will probably get a kick out of this. I know people will make a lot of like memes or jokes about what they think their cat is up to when they're not home, or what their cat could tell them if it could talk. And I mean, Stephanie gives a scenario of what a cat might tell you if it could talk. I think in some of the other stories, the gore is a little more ridiculous and lighthearted. The gore in this story for me was like just, it was just flat out gross. I'm someone who's kind of like new to figuring out like what draws me to gore in stories and like what for me is too much gore. It worked fine for me. I was like, oh, ugh, ew. And then we just kind of, skipped on. And then the other story that I really enjoyed was Tumbleweave. This is a story about a track of hair that gets loose and their encounters with other discarded objects. I'm really fascinated by stories of like what would inanimate objects do if like humans weren't around. I really like stories about dolls coming alive when I was a kid, Brave Little Toaster, stuff like that. And I feel like there's a lot of opportunities to make jokes and to like keep it funny, keep it upbeat based on like what the object is supposed to do and like how humans interact with it. And so it was just fun to watch how this like track of hair is navigating the world. She's kind of snooty. She's like a slightly more expensive grade of hair, and she has big dreams for herself, and she finds herself in the company of like castaway shorts and castaway shoes. And I think that one of the things that makes like dolls coming alive stories a little limiting is that often the dolls have no purpose but to comfort the humans, be there for the humans. It just kind of reinforces an idea of humanity being sort of central and like being the most important sentient being. I think the story just gives like a fun way to talk about what would objects do if people weren't there that isn't necessarily tied back to what the objects want to do for humans. The objects in this story, their motivations aren't super clear, but their wholeness doesn't seem to come from being with people, most of them, although it does for the main character. I thought that was like surprisingly eerie. There aren't really any circumstances in which I would see like a pair of shoes and a run-old over teddy bear like under a bridge and be kind of creeped out by it, but there's something about like their purpose and how they work together in this story that was eerie. So on the whole, I enjoyed this collection. I think this is also going to be good for people who might not necessarily read short fiction because the stories are pretty straightforward. You have the setup, you have the emotional payoff at the end. They're not as difficult to read as some other short fiction that I've read. So this book is out now. Publication day for it was on March 2nd. Do you think you'll be giving it a read? What do you look for in your short story collections? Thanks for watching. Have a good one, everybody. Goodbye.